I feel like we're playing God, right? This idea that we can recreate what it means to have a psychiatric disorder, that we're like kind of inventing this framework, right? Where God already provided one for us. Yeah. We're playing God there. And then you can't be surprised when people try and play God with life and death by committing shootings. And then you also, I think a lot of the rhetoric, I have 2 points about the rhetoric. The first relating to that playing God, where everything you were saying about like, you're hated and you're persecuted, that's like almost biblical rhetoric, right? And then you also can't blame people, or not blame people, but it's quite obvious the connection between rhetoric we're seeing online, like death before detransition and transgenocide, and people who are willing to lay down their lives in these extremely violent ways. Like I see all the connections, and it's beyond me how other people don't.
Soren Aldaco, thank you very much for joining me today. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, we could just jump right into it. As you may or may not be aware, here in Canada, in British Columbia, we had a mass shooting committed by a person who identified as transgender. And then a few days later, there's another shooting at a hockey game in Rhode Island by somebody who identified as transgender. During that period, your amazing op-ed in the Wall Street Journal popped up, and I read it, and I've been wanting to have this conversation forever. Reached out, we were able to bring this together. And Soren, before we get going here, could you maybe just give the audience a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah, for sure. So I began identifying as transgender when I was 11 years old. I was in all different corners of the internet, from like art forums to chat rooms. And some of those corners were actually pretty dark. I ended up getting groomed online. And at that point, on top of puberty, which is already really uncomfortable, I was just feeling a lot of shame over that experience. So my body was the last thing I wanted to be in. When I was presented with this framework of transgender identity, first by a 14-year-old girl who I looked up to, I kind of saw it as something that was both an extension of the role playing that I was doing on these art forums, and also an opportunity to interpret the shame I had internalized from the grooming experiences through this more positive lens. But it stayed as a role play identity for several years, until about 15, when I met my biological father for the first time. I freaked out, as I think anybody would, meeting their dad for the first time at 15, and ended up in a hospital where the psychiatrist noted that my name was different on the door than on my record, and pressured me to come out to him, which I maybe it was obvious I identified as trans by some measure, but I didn't plan on doing any medical steps until I was 18, at least. Like, I knew my family wouldn't jive with it, so I was willing to wait. But he pushed and pushed, and then he ended up telling my family that all of my problems were because I was trans. So my mom and stepdad were like, "What?" We thought the most that she'd tell us is that she liked girls. Like, we knew something was up, but like the idea that she was a boy, that was unheard of. Meanwhile, my dad and my stepmom, who were fresh in my life, started to affirm me pretty aggressively. I bounced in a support group for a while, in and out of a support group for trans youth, where kids were getting all sorts of medical interventions as young as 13, 14, and 15. And by 17, I was being prescribed testosterone by a nurse practitioner who attended that group as a parent. That would later turn into a mastectomy at 19 during, COVID lockdowns. I turned 18 in 2020. And then 6 months after that mastectomy, following some massive complications and me just kind of tracking why my doctors ghosted me when I, reported the complications to them, I ended up detransitioning in early 2022.
That's a lot.
Yeah, to say the least.
So, full disclosure, in preparation for this conversation, I've listened to a number of your interviews, read further into your history, just to kind of get a full view of you as a person. Soren, I want to start by asking this. Were you diagnosed with any psychological disorders or anything as a child?
Yeah, I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was only 7 years old. That was actually a pretty interesting diagnosis, because I'd also had a CPS case opened up with a tertiary family member, and that it could have been actually PTSD in a lot of ways, but they put me on Ritalin for that. And then later when I was 15, around, it was actually that same spring I went inpatient. They diagnosed me with major depressive disorder, autism spectrum disorder, and kind of a generalized anxiety.
So is it safe to say that you were on a cocktail of psychiatric medications from an early age?
At least on the ADHD front, yeah. Like I tried basically every prescription stimulant and, prescription non-stimulant for ADHD under the sun. And then, yeah, by the time I was 15, I was on different antidepressants, mood stabilizers, etc.
Yeah, the reason I asked that is because this seems to be the common thread, right? Where you have young people who are diagnosed with psychological conditions, some real, some potentially not, and they're introduced to the world of pharmaceuticals at a very early age.
Oh yeah.
And that seems to be what kind of warps the self-image a little bit, right?
Yeah, what's really interesting about that in particular is, so my stepdad and my mom met when I was about 3 years old. And shortly after, they ended up getting married because my stepdad became disabled. So he was on all sorts of medications, getting all sorts of surgeries from basically 2006 onward.
Yeah. And again, not to fill in the blanks for you, but I've been absorbing all things Soren for the last couple days.
Yeah.
So I could write your biography at this point.
Yeah.
So you have this stepfather who's disabled. At the same time, you're living in your grandparents' home.
Yeah.
And your grandparents are old school.
Yeah.
Right. So there's physical discipline and punishment involved there. You're struggling with a number of things all at the same time.
Yeah.
Soren, is your biological father involved in your life at all at this point?
No, he's not currently, and not then. He wasn't.
See, this is another common theme that I see with young people, not just people who identify as transgender, but young people who are struggling with a litany of psychological issues. And I myself am somebody who grew up with a single mom. My dad wasn't around much, right? And what I'm seeing is that removal of that strong male role model, that strong male figure from the home, seems to be contributing quite a bit to what we're seeing happening across Gen Z now at this point. Did you feel that your lack of having a relationship with your father contributed to a lot of your confusion around your identity?
I definitely think there was an important component insofar of like the dysfunction of my family unit, which, yeah, it goes back to my dad being absent. Absolutely. And then having the stepfather who at face value is a dad in my life, but then obviously is very disabled, not present mentally and otherwise. So yeah, my dad being gone was certainly one of those important little keys to my story. And I would say too, when you look at the fact that I kind of like lost my crap, when I was 15 and I met him for the first time, like things came to a head at that point for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to get there because what I'm interested in exploring is how this happens, because, look, the correlation between the introduction of transgenderism as an idea to children and children who identify as transgender, they're parallel with each other.
Yeah.
Right. Like they correlate completely. And there's this huge uptick over the last 10 years of young women specifically who identify as transgender.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out why this is happening. And I know psychiatric medications are playing a role. Absolutely. Because if you look into a lot of these young people, their previous medical history, a lot of them suffer from manic depression and things like that. People would say that the manic depression and the anxiety and other issues stem from their gender dysphoria. But I believe it's the other way around. I believe that this is a group of kids who are struggling with other problems, and then the transgenderism idea is introduced roughly around the preteen stage where they're trying to find their own identity. And so I want to go there with you, Soren. Like you talked about being groomed online. At what point or what time in your life were you going online and finding your way into these communities?
You make a great point, before I get into that, about like this being a way to neatly tie up all of these otherwise really complex and messy and ugly and shameful issues. That's a really great point, and one I come back to often. Around the time that I got into those the dark corners of the internet where I was groomed, I was actually accessing the internet from my DSi. I don't know if you remember the DSIs and 3DSs, Nintendo handhelds. Yeah, the I stood for internet, and I was doing little flip notes like art with my friends, and so it was like really playful. It was a lot of it was role play based. I think we were adopting identities and stories that weren't even ours, right, on one hand, and then I think kind of synthesizing that through cosplay and whatnot and bringing it into the real world on the other, which is a fine line to walk between fantasy and reality, right? So I think that was kind of the entryway for me, was being in this space where I was by myself a lot, struggling with being prescribed stimulants, the difficult home life, et cetera, all the things you've already brought up. And then I'm given this like framework of kind of costuming generally that I think is what got me into the being groomed, and also was a segue into, transgender identity as a sort of taking on a new name, a new persona, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense. I mean, here you are, this young person, your brain is just swimming in chemicals. You're struggling with a home life. Did you have a good relationship with your stepfather?
He and I are chill today. At the time, we butted heads so much because I was definitely very jealous of the attention he got from my mom, because he's disabled, like he needs help. That's his spouse. So I felt like there was that, like, my mom is being taken away from me. And then also just, I had to help him myself when she wasn't around, like help get him food, help make him Kool-Aid, stuff like that. And so I was feeling, I think, really resentful about the way that parent-child relationship appeared flipped on its head.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and that's a common thing for young people who are growing up in a broken home or a mixed family. There's a lot of confusion there. So the point is that, here you are, how old are you at this point? Maybe 12, 13 years old?
Yeah, I was 11, 12, 13.
Yeah. And you're confused, right? You're confused. Your brain is constantly fried with chemicals, and you're online, and you're fun. And what's interesting about this period in a young person's life is this is where your identity really begins to form. This is where you really begin to figure out who you are. Yeah. So you're at this stage where you're trying to figure out who you are. You don't have a real strong male role model that you're connected to in your home who's protecting you and guiding you like a father should. And so you're searching for that online. You're searching for that in online forums. And Soren, so what were the tactics that were used in order to groom you? Like what was that process?
Yeah, there was a lot of taking advantage of my naivety, for sure. I went on these websites looking whenever the original website. So to backtrack a little bit, when the original website I was role playing on got shut down because of safety concerns, we've since found out. I figured, okay, I like role playing. I want to keep role playing. So I sought out just to do what I had been doing with other little girls and boys, which was like, okay, we're role playing being girlfriend and boyfriend in high school. We're role playing Phineas and Ferb. I was trying to do these very cartoon like innocent role plays, and adults, of course, are like, yeah, like I'll role play with you. And then it would just become progressively more mature. So after, I guess, that role play component, then it was, okay, well, send me photos, of like what we're role playing. And that was how they got me to, send illicit photos of myself, et cetera, without me, even realizing, because I was around 9 or 10 at that point, that, okay, I don't actually need to trust adults in this situation. And I also definitely didn't understand what grooming was. So it felt very gradual, like a frog being boiled. I didn't get it at all.
And I think the role-playing component is really important here, right? Because what that shows is that at that age, you're already looking to escape your reality. You're role-playing because it's a form of escapism. It's allowing you to be somebody else other than you and who you are. So at that point, you're role-playing, and you're as vulnerable could be in that situation because you're searching for an identity, right?
Yeah, exactly. And see, like, role play is a relatively developmentally appropriate thing when done with your peers, typically in embodied circumstances. Like, you look on the playground, kids are playing cops and robbers to learn what it's like to be brave and mischievous. But over time, you're supposed to integrate that. And I think that integration happens through your five senses, through, you know, that experience in your body. When it's divorced and two-dimensional like it is online, you're not actually doing it in a real productive manner.
Of course. And not only that, but again, you're dealing with, you know, a ton of psychological trauma, right?
Yeah.
You're dealing with depression, you're dealing with things like that. So it even further alienates you from, you know, other kids in your age group. So you're searching for a community, you're searching for an identity at the same time, at that age where you want to peacock a little bit, you know, at that age. Like, I have a 15-year-old son, and, you know, he's always searching for ways to be unique and stand out. And, you know, and it's not so much just making yourself attractive to the opposite sex. It's also making yourself attractive to the world. That's what you're trying to do at that stage. You're trying to make yourself unique. And the thing with transgenderism as it is presented to young people now that drives me crazy is that it is presented as a way of peacocking. It is presented as a means of making yourself unique. And that's what I think has attracted so many young people to it. Would you agree with that?
I would, especially when you think about the rhetoric used in transgender communities of, you know, being your authentic self, finding your authentic self. I think that there is a lot of emphasis on that individuality. And you see this even more so in certain schools of thought within the transgender community, because there's a lot, it's not a homogenous group as some may think. There's people who are very much like, if you have gender dysphoria, you need to transition. And there's other people who are like, you're trans even if you never take hormones, choose whatever pronouns you want, be a Zazier, be a frog gender. Like, I think that that's where people, you know, it's actually quite, it exemplifies that chaos of individuality that it eventually boils down to.
Yeah. And I mean, also too, like, if you're a young person who's playing with these ideas and you have strong role models, be it male or female, in your life that you feel you can trust, that you could speak to, those are the people who are going to be there to kind of guide you through that, right?
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that actually reflects, I've said for a while that healthy identity formation involves a self that's internally anchored, yet outwardly adaptable. And actually, when you're young and you haven't internalized it yourself, what you just mentioned about coming back to your parents as a home base to help guide you is, in a way, an externalization of that concept that you eventually get in adulthood. You have all of these things you're exploring out in the world, but you have mom and dad who really ground you and like, no, this is what's right. So yeah, it can be messy, I think, when it comes time to have that grounding in yourself and you never even got it modeled to you in the first place.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not even just mom and dad, you know, like with this young man who did the mass shooting in Tumbler Ridge in British Columbia. Like, my comment on that was, I just wish these young people had somebody that they could trust. It seems like that's what's lacking in their lives, is like an adult guide that they can trust, that is going to guide them with the right intentions, right?
Yeah, like a mentor.
Exactly, because when you don't have those positive role models and influences in your life, again, you're opening yourself up to the bad influences, and those bad influences being the groomers that you encountered online, where you're sending illicit photos of yourself at 10 years old to these people, right? Like that's what I have said repeatedly in the wake of this mass shooting, in the wake of others, is that my generation, I'm part of the Gen X millennial generation. You know, I'm 43. We failed. We fucking failed. We failed as parents, because we grew up in the 90s when everything was about you, and, you know, the whole world revolves around you, and you are special and you deserve it. And so now as adults, we have that perspective about ourselves and our place in the world. And because of that, we are not raising our children. We're not doing our job, right? Like this young man who shot up this school, his mother was unfortunately, she was a victim of the shooting, but she was a member of my generation. And see, this is the thing. The other side of it is this: I get why parents now are falling for this shit with being told by psychiatrists and doctors that your child is transgender, and if you don't affirm their identity, they're going to kill themselves. I get that as a parent. I'm a parent. I have 2 children. If a doctor told me, like, hey, if you don't do this thing, your child is at high risk for suicide, I'd be fucking terrified. Yeah. It just so happens that I read, so I know that if I don't affirm my child's I know that if my child comes up with an identity that is not rooted in reality, that there's a deeper problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for a lot of parents, they don't know. I mean, and I don't blame them. You go to work 8 hours a day, you come home, you make dinner, you know, you work on the homework with the kids. You have maybe 45 minutes to hear about their day and talk to them and sit down with them. You're not paying as much attention as you should be. And so when a doctor says, hey, your son thinks he's a girl, and if you don't start with the process of transition, then your son's risk of committing suicide goes up dramatically, you're going to believe them. Yeah. And that's part of this illness, right? And the thing that I'm trying to figure out, Soren, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent.
You're okay.
Here, what I'm trying to figure out is, where the fuck is this all coming from? You know what I mean? Like, because look, our generation, my generation as parents, yes, we're lazy, we're stupid, we're uneducated, we're narcissistic, and we're selfish. I'll take that on as a member of my generation because I know them. They are idiots. But there's an external thing going on there. There's an external evil that is taking advantage of that and ripping our children away from us. And I don't know what that is. So I guess that's my question. Like, Soren, do you have any idea what that thing is? Because you've encountered it and looked into it. And what is it? What is that thing that's out there that's pushing young people like yourself to do these things to themselves?
That's a great question. That's one I think I might actually spend the rest of my life pondering. I mean, I'm a woman of faith, so I think for me, like, I do believe in evil, but the way that manifests in our world, if I can turn it back just a little bit, you talking about the way that Gen X feels very like self-assured and very self-righteous. I reflect on, I mean, that in itself, that in and of itself, right, is a kind of evil of sorts, right? Like it's considered a sin by many cultures. And when I look at like the internet, right, which is kind of the cesspool, like if I had to say there was a hell on earth, I would say it's probably the internet, which it can be a great place too, right? Don't get me wrong. It's great, but it's where a lot of this harm is proliferating. It's where it's coming out of. And you have Gen X and millennials who were raised on the internet. You guys were some of the very first to dip your toes in. And I'm just curious, when you combine that with that kind of narcissism you were mentioning, how easy it is to assume that you know everything about the parental controls you're putting on your kid's phone, even if they might be able to get around them, that you know what the internet has to offer. And it didn't hurt you. You turned out just fine. So, you know, what does that mean for your kids? Are they going to be just as lucky? And, you know, I think it's hard for me to answer the what is that thing question at large. But if I had to start somewhere, I mean, I do think just that that selfishness in and of itself is maybe that bad thing. Like almost like, not that we're the evil, but that we definitely are like, we're like vessels for it, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, look, what's fascinating to me is over the last few years, like I found my way back to God 3 years ago. Right.
Awesome.
And I'm watching other people make the same journey, which is incredible. And I think what's happening is that people individually are coming to realize that we've strayed too far away from our creator, from the source, whatever you want to call it, right? Some people refer to it as the universe. Some people call it Allah. Some people call it, you know, Jesus. Some people call it God. Whatever it is, we've strayed away from that thing that we're all connected to. I my view on God is it's everything everywhere at once. It's the stream of consciousness that flows through our universe that we are all connected to. And I think there's this awakening that's happening within people because things have gotten so bad. I mean, we've mutilated our children. You know what I mean? We've mutilated our children. Like the way I look at with these mass shootings committed by transgender identifying people is, of course that's happening. Of course it's happening. Look at what we did, right? Like we allowed our children to take hormones, to inject hormones into their body, alter themselves, and then go through surgical procedures to remove their sexual organs when we were the ones who were supposed to get in the way of that. Yeah. And now these kids are growing up and realizing that they were abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect them. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah.
you
And
know?
so much of it, I think, when these young people are expressing their rage, and unfortunately, in some cases, through tragedies like committing shootings, I don't even know that they're fully conscious of how they got there. Like, I think they just feel that pit. They feel that emptiness. They feel that abuse, right? It's like I said earlier when I was being groomed that I didn't really get it at all. Yet there was this deep, deep shame that I also mentioned, right? Which sounds contradictory, but in fact, I didn't know that it was this thing before me that was causing me to feel that way, but my body knew. Like, it was somatic. Your body senses danger before you even have an intellectual understanding of it. So yeah, no, even if these people still identify as trans, they don't quite understand that maybe that's just, exacerbating their unrest. It's going to be present regardless.
Absolutely, especially if you're implanting that idea in their heads, right? Like,
Yeah.
I want to go back to your story, Soren, because now we're at this stage in your life where you're part of these communities, you're being groomed, you're role playing. Did the idea that you were a boy trapped in a girl's body occur to you at any point during that period?
Not independently. I think for the longest time, actually, I had a hard time wrapping my head around like being male or female in any intellectual way. Like, my body knew it was female. Like, I knew I was female, like instinctually, because I am, right. But when it came to thinking about it, like, I did have a hard time adhering to those social norms. Like, when they split us up into boys and girls, like, I'm like, why can't I go hang out with my best friend who's a boy? Like, I didn't get stuff like that. But it wasn't like, okay, my body needs to be chopped up. Like, I need to do something about this that's like severe and radical. And right now, it was just, I think, part of that normal childhood and teenage angst in a way.
Yeah, yeah. So the gender dysphoria is not really a thought in your mind at that period. I mean, at this point, you're maybe, I wouldn't even refer to it as gender nonconforming, because I think somebody at that age, during that time in their life, don't even have that as a frame of reference, right?
Yeah.
You're like, my best friend's a boy. Why can't I play basketball
They're
with my
just
best
kids.
friend?
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. They're kids. And that's what this thing is taking advantage of, is the naivety of children, right? And saying, oh, you want to go over and play basketball with the boys? Well, then you're a boy.
Yeah.
Whereas you just want to play with your friend.
Exactly.
Like it's and I don't want to simplify it or distill it down to being something that simple, but it really is.
Yeah.
It really is that simple.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we know it. We know it too.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of the like sex constancy, the concept of sex constancy, but if you show a 5-year-old a Ken doll naked and you ask that 5-year-old, is this a boy or a girl? They're going to say boy. But if you dress that Ken doll up in a dress, right, and you ask the same question, they'll say girl, because at that age, until they're 8 or 9, and that's only when it starts, is 8 or 9, they don't understand boy and girl beyond the surface. They really don't. So it's not something that they're thinking about really deeply in this carnal way. And even when it comes to the surface level things, it's all play to them. It's all about dress up. It's all about costume. So yeah, it's definitely a lot more simple than we as adults take it for.
Well, and I mean, what's I don't want to say hilarious, because none of this is funny, but what's interesting, at least to me, is that when you talk to people who are disciples of this transgender cult, right? The idea is always like, gender is a social construct. Gender is a social construct. But if this boy likes to play with girl toys, then he's a girl. And it's like, but I thought it was a social construct. Like, what are you talking about? Now you're getting into an idea of gender being embedded in that person's DNA, right?
Yeah.
Like, if gender is a social construct, then you can just socially change what gender means to that little boy, right?
Yeah.
The point that I'm trying to make is that their argument doesn't hold water at all. Like, their entire philosophy is completely empty. And again, I cannot figure out why these people are trying to do what they're doing, because it is just evil to the core. Like, as a Christian man, I've done a lot of reading into this concept of Lucifer, of Satan, what it is, right? And the original concept of Satan really derives from an absence of God, right? An absence of light. Satan isn't really a singular figure. It's more a force that exists where God is absent, where the vacant spaces. And so when you're looking at this thing, you're looking at Satan. That's what Satan is. right? Satan, that energy, that force mutilates children. And that's what these people are. That's what they represent, this Luciferian desire to destroy and to destroy innocence, to destroy the most innocent members of our species.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And well, looking back to, what we were talking about of people not always being conscious yet, acting as vessels anyways, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance as parents, right? You have this belief of, I want to help my kids, but then your actions might actually be hurting them. Someone who decides to shoot up a population because of their angst might, feel their body, the somatic understanding of something being wrong, but not actually have the words to articulate it. Might point to something else like hatred, a criticism of their identity. And here you have people who, in the case of the arguments not lining up, who recognize the kind of essential biological component of male and female, yet want to verbally argue for a more nebulous conceptual version of male and female instead. All of it comes down to people saying one thing and doing another. And when you consider what sin is, right, in this representation of what you just described as Lucifer, as being a contradiction, or as being this thing that is evil, when we think about what sin does in pulling us away from God, right? If Lucifer is this absence of God from what you're saying, and sin pulls us away from God, yet our desire is always to be closer to God, that conflict and cognitive dissonance is present there too. We feel our distance from God, yet we don't want to admit that maybe distance is what's going on. I don't know if that makes sense. It's all
makes total sense. It makes total sense. No, and it's again a product of our narcissism, right? In believing that it's very difficult. I was saying this recently to a friend. The thing about Jesus Christ is Jesus's message is very simple, right? Jesus's message is love. Just love everyone unconditionally all the time. And it's very simple and very basic, but it's the most difficult because it's difficult to do that. It's difficult to love everyone all the time.
Yeah.
And the point is that through our narcissism, we've become spiritually lazy in that we don't have the discipline to even try that. Hate is easier, right? Hate is a knee-jerk reaction. It's part of our nature, right?
Yeah.
So it's easier to just go, I don't like that. I hate those people. I hope they all die. These people are wrong. I disagree with them. I can't even be around them, rather than to say, okay, I disagree, but what's the common ground between us?
Yeah.
How do we find the commonality there? And that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of discipline. And I think that's what has led us as a species into the darkness, is because we've made it okay to be selfish and okay to be narcissistic and okay to be completely subjective in our thinking, right? Like this concept of my truth, that's a very postmodern concept. And postmodernism, if you want to distill it down to like its very basic foundational ideas, it's narcissism, it's selfishness, it's subjective reality. How I see the world is what the world is.
Yeah.
Right? Well, that's not what the world is. There is the objective world, and we're all part of it, right? And so, Soren, I want to talk about your transition. At what age did you begin transitioning, and what was that pathway? Like, what triggered that?
Yeah, I guess that's a complex question. It's multi-layered. You have the social transition that began at 11, and then the medical transition that began at 17. The trigger for the social transition was, as I mentioned before, being in these role play forums, having this girl who I was like dating at the time, but we were like 11 and 14 and it was long distance. So like, I don't know how much dating that is as opposed to being friends, but she identified as trans and I related to her. So I was like, hey, that makes sense. Like that label sounds like me too. At 17, I started taking the hormones around the time that I was in that support group where I was just surrounded by a bunch of medicalized kids, having hormones, getting double mastectomies, preparing for bottom surgery, the boys especially. And I was very envious of the affirmation that they were receiving. I remember thinking, okay, their parents are approving all of these, medical interventions for them. Why why won't my mom? And I hadn't really asked her at that point, but I just knew. I'm like, my mom's, that's not going to fly. And my dad and my stepmom had no medical authority over me. They weren't even on my birth certificate, right? So there was that kind of conflict, but my stepmom ended up taking me to the nurse practitioner anyways. She had a little letter that authorized her to like take me to doctor's appointments and stuff, but typically only like if my mom wasn't, I don't remember the exact text, but like only if my mom wasn't available and in emergency context. So in my opinion, that doesn't cover getting a 17-year-old, exogenous hormones for gender dysphoria, but I'm no lawyer. And yeah, that was the point that I started the hormones, was just actually a month and a half or so before COVID lockdown, without parental consent, in a legal, permissible manner.
Wow. And so prior to that, when you were 15, were you institutionalized briefly, or you just went to see a therapist?
I was institutionalized briefly. I went inpatient. I remember I dropped out of high school to go to an online high school, like brick and mortar high school, to go to an online high school. Just felt really overwhelmed by the curriculum. I'd been on those ADHD meds all growing up, and I stopped taking them in middle school, and I just didn't know how to function because they were the crutch that I had used for so long. So I ended up leaving to do this more paced version of education. And I was working with my stepdad. I got him a job. I was working full time at a polling firm. And I remember we were heading home, and we got into a fight because I was training to drive at the time, and he told me, okay, like, you'll get to drive home. But he was in massive pain. He's working on these servers hunched over. He has like a cyborg back, bionic back. And he was like, you can't drive today. I cannot sit in that passenger seat, kid. And I lost my shit. Like, I was like, you can't, like, you promised me, this is what I've been looking forward to all day. And I just remember being like, everything cracked at that point. I'm like, well, now I know my biological father, because I'd met him about a month before this. And I just remember like crying and seething and ranting and raving for several hours. And I don't know that I would characterize it as a manic episode. I think it was just like all of this pent up pressure coming to a head. I was on stimulants, so you can say maybe those were wearing off, and I was, like having not roid rage, but that stimulant crash. But either way, that was, I ended up, they took me to the hospital and were like, hey, can you like check her out? But it was kind of my idea. Like, I was like, I need to go figure out what's wrong with me because no one else seems concerned.
Right. And so it's there at the hospital. Now, something that I don't want to gloss over here is that you did eventually attempt to restart your relationship with your biological father.
Yeah.
How was that? How did that go?
Yeah. So it was about a month before that inpatient visit. And it went well. He kind of pretended like he had never been gone. Like, it was kind of like, oh, hey kid. Here's my SoundCloud. I actually, like, I shit you not. I reached out to him on Facebook, and one of the first messages he sent me was like, I make music on SoundCloud. Here's the link. It's actually so hilarious in hindsight. But it was
so weird.
I know. He was like, you do music? Like, I do music. Cool. You must be my kid. And the second we met up in person, the resemblance was pretty obvious, but it went well because he and my stepmom, and I have a little sister too, a half sister through them. They were a little better off than my mom and my stepdad were because we were, single income growing up, and my mom was like a pharmacy tech, so she didn't like, it wasn't paid very well, to say the least. Yeah. And so they could help me with like, getting clothes for school, like new clothes. They could help me with, getting some spare groceries. I had a couple of food allergies at the time that I was dealing with. So they were able to provide in some ways, but it was mostly just like I'd hang out on a Friday night, stay the night. They weren't like actually very involved. It was kind of all surface level and very much oriented around me getting to know my little sister and being best friends with my stepmom.
Right. Yeah. So it's attempting to integrate you into the family, but at that point in time, at 15, it's kind of like, you're the majority of your formative years are behind you, right? So it's like, okay, let's build this relationship with your dad, with your stepmom, with your sister, but it's still strained because it feels foreign. Right?
Yeah, it feels foreign.
Yeah. And so you go through that episode, you're institutionalized very briefly, and it's there that you encounter a psychiatrist, and that's where, is it at that point that the transgenderism comes into the picture?
It's at that point that it was affirmed by a medical professional, because it was more of like a role play identity. I was going by, like he, him pronouns and a boy name, and generally being treated as like a guy by my friends at school, by my friends at a summer camp I would go to every summer. It was mostly with other kids. And it wasn't until the medical professional intervened and had sort of misallocated that summer camp experience that the trans identity became linked into this medical context. Because I in seventh grade, I took my SATs, got approved for like a gifted and talented summer camp, and started going.
Right.
This was between like seventh grade and 10th grade, and during those three weeks every year, I was just so happy. I remember during the other 49 weeks, I would be like having lucid dreams of being back at that camp. I was so obsessed with it. And I remember they would affirm me socially at that camp as a boy, he, him, etc. And I remember thinking, okay, I get to be myself for 3 weeks. That's why I'm happy. But in fact, it was probably because I didn't have to worry about being provided for. There wasn't a scarcity at this summer camp. I got to be intellectually stimulated with other quirky, smart kids. I just belonged, frankly, is what it was. And so I told him about this experience. And instead of realizing, okay, quirky girl who has never fit in before fits in, makes a lot of sense, he went, oh, gender identity affirmed? Like that must be it. So yeah, there was a misattribution there for sure. But yeah, that was when it became more real.
What's amazing to me is that through that conversation, he never once made the connection that like, hey, this is a hyper intellectual girl. This is a girl of above average intelligence. Perhaps she's just in a scenario in her daily life where she's alienated and isolated because she doesn't feel much of a connection to the kids around her. And the reason why she's enjoying the summer camp so much is because she's finally around kids who are like her. But instead, they're just like, no, she's a boy.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And there's also the component of a brain like mine loves to solve problems. If there's not a problem, I will create a problem. And in the case of puberty, like you're presented with some real problems. Like you have to gain wisdom, you have to find yourself, whatever. But there's not a lot you can do to expedite that process. However, when I had these real problems like puberty, like, my parents, my family being poor, not having my dad in my life, etc., I couldn't really do anything about that, right? Like at 12, I couldn't go work, right? At 13, I couldn't just suddenly have my dad again. I didn't have his information or anything. So I feel like in some ways I was trying to lean into that natural problem solving ability with trying to solve these gender identity issues. I think if you had given me a book of Sudoku and said, hey, here, let's take your phone away, solve that, I might have been better off. But that's something I think about sometimes.
Well, yeah. And just the fact that, maybe, like you said, having a Sudoku book or like taking it to the next level, taking you to a bookstore and going, Soren, pick out 5 books you want. Let's find your interests. Let's find where you really excel. It's like all of these adults who are supposed to be doing these things and encouraging the things that you love and encouraging your intelligence to flourish and grow. They're just finding the shortcut solution. And what puzzles me is how this person, a doctor, a licensed physician, did not see in you that this is just a hyper intelligent young woman and we need to foster that rather than, oh, this is a person who's genuinely confused about their gender.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Like, I'm sorry, I don't mean to get hung up on that. It just, it because that's a critical moment in your life, right? Where you're guided in a certain direction where you could have went in down the totally right path. So
exactly.
From that point forward, so from 15 to 17, what's the process there? Like, are you identifying as a boy at that point?
Yeah, pretty much right after that experience. My dad and my stepmom started affirming me in my gender identity. It was peculiar because before that visit, I remember asking my stepmom to call me by my preferred name. And she was like, no, I don't really do nicknames for anybody. I'm not going to do that. But the second the gender identity was involved, she was all on board. And my dad and my stepmom, they had actually been sat down by my mom and my stepdad who raised me just actually during the time I was in the hospital still. I was there for 3 days. This happened on like day 2, day 3, they sat each other down. Something like that. And my mom and my stepdad were like, hey, we know her. We've watched her all growing up. Like, please don't affirm this. Like, we thought she'd come and say, she liked girls, something like that, but not that she was a boy. And my dad and my stepmom affirmed me anyways. So yeah, it was me identifying as a boy at that point. I got a whole new wardrobe thanks to my dad and my stepmom. They were buying me binders, helping me get packers. Like they were really, really leaning into that with me. I don't know if it was like a bonding moment or what, but that's just what happened.
Well, no, what it is that this guy knows fucking nothing about you, right? And look, he's probably a great guy, but as a dad, like as a father myself, being a dad is hard. It's really, really, really hard a lot of the time,
I
right?
can imagine.
But despite how hard it is, I could never, ever, ever leave my children. Like if for whatever reason me and my wife ever divorced, I would move a block away and be there and be present, right? So the point is that you have this guy and this woman who know nothing about you, and the people who actually know you telling them, don't do this. Like, don't go down this road. But they're adamant about it. And it's because they don't know you. They don't know you like a parent would know you.
Yeah.
You know, so at this point, you're a victim of being raised by essentially strangers who are affirming this insanity, right?
Yeah, and well, it's tough too because, as you mentioned, this was a crux. Like this was part of the climax of that part of my life, and having them, come into my life and me going to the hospital, it could have been a fresh start for everyone if the doctor had done his job and been like, "Hey, the family dynamics, what's messed up?" Because again, I had met my dad a month before this. Anyone who couldn't see that timeline and how it aligned with my mental break, like it's right there. It's obvious. It's screaming. If they had pointed out the dysfunction, we could have solved that. We could have moved forward with, okay, hey, let's try and co-parent. Let's try and give this girl what she needs. There's 4 of us. Between 4 of us, we can maybe provide for her holistically. And it ended up being them almost fighting one another. Like I felt triangulated by my dad and my stepmom.
Totally. And that's totally understandable, right? Especially now you find yourself in this situation where like, you have this dad and the stepmom who you don't really know, who are like affirming your identity. You're maybe in some ways being rewarded for your uniqueness socially, right? Because you're doing this right at a period where the transgender trend is at its height, right? So you're walking out into society and you're unique. You're people for once in your life, people are finding something interesting about you.
They're paying attention to me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So let's take this a step further. So now 17, you begin the hormone treatments. What other alterations were made during that period?
As I mentioned previously, just briefly, I was binding my chest. I'd been doing that since 13. I had a friend's mom who purchased my first binder for me. But my stepmom was helping me get, like I had maybe 5, 6, 7 binders at one time. I had gotten a like stand to pee packer that was like $600. And that I used it like once, peed on myself and never touched it again. Like standing at a urinal is no joke. That's like, it's tough. It's actually more tough when you don't have the proper equipment for that.
Yeah.
But those were the main alterations at that time was mostly as far as pseudo-medical interventions were concerned.
Yeah. And then, so you're living your life as a boy, you're taking the hormones. What are the physical changes that you experience at that time?
Well, to touch on that first comment, right? Living my life as a boy. I think it's important to distinguish here. I was still living in many ways as a girl with my mom and that side of the family. Like they were still calling me by my given name. They were still, I was expressing a little bit more effeminately with them to try and fit in. And then you had with my dad and my stepmom, there was a non-binary period where I identified as a he, him, but they would only use they, them because they wanted to affirm my transgender identity full frontal as far as the binders and such were concerned, but they didn't want to confuse my little sister. But then there was a precipice where they were just like, you know what? She's going to be confused anyways. Like, because she kept asking me, are you a boy or a girl? Because she's like 5 or 6. She's pre-sex constancy, like we mentioned earlier. She's like, are you a boy or a girl, Cupcake? She's so young, she called me Cupcake because my hair was purple.
Right.
And so they were treating me like a boy in some ways. But the changes, right, to that second part of what you said, the changes. I mean, the kind of obvious ones, my voice got deeper. I grew facial hair. The worst of it started coming when I was experiencing pretty bad chest pain. I was having joint pain, headaches, dizziness. I would faint upon standing at times.
Wow.
And the primary care physician, that nurse practitioner who prescribed me the hormones, I was seeing him as my PCP as well. And he was just kind of writing referrals to handle all those side effects. Like, he never stopped and, considered aloud with me, at least, this could be due to the testosterone. Like, what do you think about that? Maybe we take you off of it. Like, what's up? No, it was just go see a rheumatologist, go see a neurologist, go see a gastro. So I was being ping ponged around all these different specialists. And I was on, by the time I had my mastectomy in 2021, over 10 different medications.
Yeah. So the answer to it all is just to further medicalize you.
Yeah.
Now, this nurse practitioner, so we covered this earlier, but I just want to review this again for the listeners. This was a parent in one of the support groups that you were a part of, right?
Yeah, he had an adult child. His child was an adult who was identifying as trans, who was attending the adult part of the group, because there were 3 subsets of the group. There was a subset for adult transitioners, minor transitioners, and then what they call SOFAs, significant others, friends, family, and allies. And he was one of the SOFAs.
Now, would you consider what he did with you as another form of grooming?
I would say maybe not him as a solo actor, but that group, definitely, like that organization. Almost everybody that I spoke to was seeing him. They were all going to the same plastic surgeons at the American Institute of Plastic Surgery, I believe it's called. Like, the doctors are like Doolin and Paul, something like that. They were all kind of connecting one another. So if a kid went to this group, there was really one track for them to follow. And what was important was actually my mom, my biological mom, had gone to one meeting, because I asked her, I'm like, hey, will you go to one meeting? Will you try and understand? Because for the year after me being outed by that psychiatrist, my mom just kind of ignored it. Like, she just didn't talk to me about it. And I remember sitting her in the car and being like, hey, Mom, I think you already know, like, I identify as a boy. And she was like, yeah, I already know, but I was going to let you tell me yourself, because I didn't know if you knew I knew, blah, blah, blah. And I asked her to go to the support group, and she went, and she was like, I'm not going back. Like, they were not friendly to me. I didn't feel like I could actually ask questions. Like, it was just, take this information about what's right for your kid and stop being a bad parent. And not even like a bad parent in the sense of she wasn't, providing emotionally for me because she was working her butt off at Walgreens. Like, no, it was, you're being a bad parent because you're even questioning whether or not your kid is trans.
Yeah. And as a parent, that is a very difficult place to be, you know, because now you're already down this road. Like I said, I have a 15-year-old son, and as a parent, you start to, once they reach that age, you start to figure out, like, okay, where do I let go and where do I hold on tighter? Like, where are the right spots? Yeah. And that's probably where your mom is at that time, trying to figure out where the right spots are to hold you tighter. Yeah. And doesn't, now as you're going through these hormone therapies and these changes are happening in your body, are you also still taking the psychiatric medications at that time?
Yeah, I was. And I think a good detail to include here is I was dating another young woman who also identified as trans, who started the hormones a week before me. We influenced each other's medical transition, and she was also on these psychiatric stimulant medications.
Do you think that there is a connection between those psychiatric medications and the zeal for transitioning, like for changing your gender? Like, is there some sort of interaction between that mind virus, which is what I call it, because it's something that was planted in your head as a young person. Now you're going along this path, this track to becoming a boy. Is there something in those stimulant medications that's almost creating like a manic or obsessive you know what I'm saying here, right?
Yeah, I
like
do.
An obsessive drive toward becoming the opposite gender?
I think that these medications do influence obsessive compulsive thinking.
Yeah.
Especially, we see that in a much more extreme example, like someone who's addicted to like cocaine or crack, like they're very like one track, obsessing over things. On a smaller scale, you see that in these stimulant medications. And from what I understand, and I'm not a neurologist, I don't do neuroscience, right? I do psychology. The parts of the brain that are active and what people, kind of lump together as ADHD are very similar to actually the parts of the brain that we lump together under OCD. And so there is like an obsessive compulsive, like the kind of parts of the brain that we see act in obsessive compulsive, like thought loops. Those are part of what the medications are acting on, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of so I did an episode years ago, about a year ago now, with a guy named Dr. Roger McFillin, and he specializes in the correlation between mass shooters and SSRIs.
Oh,
right?
interesting.
And what he's found, don't quote me on this number, I'll have to look it up on Grok after, but I think it's roughly like 90% of mass shooters are on some form of SSRI. And see, here's what I think is happening with this trans mass shooting phenomena, right? Because prior to a few years ago, it was all kind of like the same type, right? Like white guy spends a lot of time on the internet.
I mean, these
out of
are
his
white
mind.
guys spending a lot of time on the internet, but a different kind.
Right.
Sorry.
but it's similar, right? Because these guys are all on SSRIs. They're all on some form of antidepressant, battling with a number of psychological conditions that, through, say, influences on the internet and other influences, end up walking into a movie theater and shooting up a theater full of people. But now what we're seeing is this phenomenon occur with transgender people. But I don't think I think the transgenderism is a symptom of the deeper problem.
I agree.
That what the real problem is that these are people who have been diagnosed, often misdiagnosed, as having deep psychological issues that can only be treated with psychiatric medications.
100%.
And that's what's contributing to this.
And it's so frustrating for me, like looking back on my own experience, and also someone who studies psychology, is I see so clearly the way that these issues are holistic. Like they come from a mix of nature and nurture, like our natural temperaments, and then also the experiences we have, the drugs we're put on from an early age, et cetera. And somehow there's an essential answer for everything. We see this with autism too. Around the same time that I was detransitioning, I actually originally started to really question my thought processes behind things because I had been diagnosed with autism. And I realized, okay, maybe I was just neglected. Like, how much of my autism is some essential, like I have a gene somewhere that made me autistic, or, how much of it is I wasn't socialized in a systematic manner. I wasn't given the same kind of insights and education on how to fit into social groups that come quite naturally when you're close with your parents. Like, I realized I could re-socialize myself in that way. And maybe, there were multiple explanations for the gender dysphoria thing too. I think it's actually quite a systemic issue in psychiatry and psychology generally. It's not just gender identity disorder or ADHD. I think a lot of these things fall into that same bucket.
I completely agree. Yeah. And I think that the gender dysphoria, as you just illustrated, it's an extension of something else.
Yeah.
Right. And that it's again, as a society, our main fault here is that we are looking for shortcut solutions to very complicated problems.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the early DSMs at all? The diagnostic manuals?
No.
I did a research project on this last semester in school for a history and systems of psychology class. If you ever get the opportunity to take one of those, I recommend it. But in those early DSMs, they referred to a lot of these disorders as responses. So like depressive response, anxious response. And this was like kind of pre-major pharmaceuticals. These were seen as a response to an environmental circumstance that was, like causing a person distress. And then today we see them more, we saw this explosion in the DSM-3 and 4 of just hundreds and hundreds of psychiatric ailments that were very specific in how they were diagnosed and had very specific treatments. And when you look at the way that we have to tie things up neatly for insurance billing and diagnostic codes, I feel like it's not that we actually discovered there was a single cause for some of these things or an easy way to explain them. It was just profit driven. It was, okay, how can I get money from insurance? You mentioned that earlier, right? You brought that up. How can I get money for insurance? And, I think in the course of that, we've just totally abandoned what came very naturally at one point, instinctively at one point.
Absolutely. and again, it's intellectual laziness, it's narcissism, it's an unwanting, just zero desire to figure out what's actually happening. And again, we've confused these kids to a degree where, like, when they walk into a school with a loaded rifle and they're on 13 different antidepressants and they've been told they're gender dysphoric. And see, there's also an external pressure there as well, because when you're told that you have gender dysphoria and that you're going to transition to the opposite sex, that's not a natural transition, right? So no matter who you are, no matter how hard you try, chances are you're never going to be convincing as a member of the opposite gender. So you're exacerbating your problems, because now you're even weirder.
Yeah.
Now you're even stranger. And then you're told by whatever, because everything has been politicized, by the political cult that you are now a default member of, that the world doesn't understand you. This group over here hates you. These people hate you. They all want you to fucking die. Everybody wants you dead. You're terrible. Right. Yeah. So you've gone through this process of trying to become the person that you're told you really are. And then you begin that process. And when you're along that road, you're told by the same people who were told to affirm you that everybody hates you, nobody wants you to live. If you don't do what we tell you, then this other group is going to kill you. They want you to die. So it's like, what do you think is going to happen, man?
No, exactly. And I see two points that I want to point out there. There's the first that I feel like we're playing God. Right. This idea that we can recreate what it means to have a psychiatric disorder, that we're like kind of inventing this framework, right? Where God already provided one for us. We're playing God there. And then you can't be surprised when people try and play God with life and death by committing shootings. And then you also, I think a lot of the rhetoric, I have 2 points about the rhetoric. The first relating to that playing God, where everything you were saying about like, you're hated and you're persecuted, that's like almost biblical rhetoric, right? And then you also can't blame people, or not blame people, but it's quite obvious the connection between rhetoric we're seeing online, like death before detransition and transgenocide, and people who are willing to lay down their lives in these extremely violent ways. Like, just I see all the connections, and it's beyond me how other people don't.
Yeah, and not only that, but what we're doing is we're affirming weakness, right? We're saying you're weak, you need to be protected. Don't worry, we'll protect you. There's this enemy, there's this devil, right? The transgenocide is coming for you, and you're weak. That's okay. You be weak. We're not going to make you stronger. You don't need to be stronger. You don't need to be wise. We'll do that job for you.
Yeah, it's these intuitive frameworks that are being co-opted. Yeah,
exactly, right? Like, and we're doing this to children. You know, it's different if you're 25 years old, you're fully developed. You used to like to, put on your sister's bra when she wasn't home, and you've always felt like a girl inside, and you begin to take those steps. It's different because you're fully developed. You've lived long enough to know who you are. But when you're 15 years old, you don't know who you are. I have a 15-year-old here right now. I could show him to you. He has no fucking idea. And it's my job as a parent to guide him on that journey. And the thing that really, really stuns me is the lack of adults in the room, the lack of adults who are willing to just step forward and give the kid a hug and say, hey, listen, man, let's go for a walk. What's going on? Like, what's going on with you? Talk to me. Let's build this trust with you so that you can feel free to talk to me about who you really are and the things you're really concerned about, and do it in a way that I'm not going to take advantage of you.
Yeah.
That I'm actually just here to mentor you and help you along the way. And the more that I think about this, the more that I think it's just a massive societal failure.
I agree.
And that's what we're seeing in these trans mass shooters. They're the same. They are the product of the same disease that produced all the mass shooters prior and all the other ones that'll come after, right? Yeah. It's the same cultural disease. It's just a lack of want. It's a lack of desire to raise our children and to guide them, right?
It's disorder of the family unit.
100%. It's disorder of the family unit. It's the removal of God. And see, this is the thing. Like, I don't push my spirituality on people because I feel like a relationship with God is a personal thing. And I think it's God calls all of us, and it's whether or not you respond to the call, right? And it's not my, it's none of my business how you respond to the call or if you respond to the call, right? But having that relationship absolutely helps, especially for a young person to go out into the world and find themselves and discover the world confidently, right? And we've removed that. Like you said earlier, it's, we've convinced ourselves that we are God. We have put ourselves in the place of God. And what we're seeing now is the result of that. When you make yourself God, when you tell yourself that God doesn't exist, that you are on your own, that you're all alone, I mean, that is just such a perilous way to view yourself in the world, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it wraps nicely into what you were saying about like that almost Luciferian quality of society and of this movement, that as we are more distant from God because we have tried to take over God, to throw God away and recreate God, that I think is essentially what I meant by we're vessels, right, for this evil, because we are the distance from God at that point. Like we are totally removed. And I think it's possible to regain that closeness. I think a lot of my healing has actually come from getting closer to God. And I think that's I almost wanted to answer earlier. Okay, I can't tell you what that bad thing is, but I can tell you what the good thing is, because I can't quite identify what brought me into the transgender thing, but I think coming out of it definitely was reconnecting with those spiritual roots.
So let's go there, because I wanted to close our conversation that way, on a happy ending, because obviously everybody can see you look great, you're doing well, you're in school, you're doing fantastic, you're taking time away from your homework to talk to me today, so that's fantastic.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
it's hard. Not hard. This has actually been quite easy. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. So at what point do you decide, hey, I've scrambled my brains, I've confused myself, I need to find a way out of this, and I need to begin detransitioning? What steered you in that direction?
So about 6 months after my mastectomy, I was just really reflecting on my complications. And, some people will say, oh, you detransitioned because your transition failed. And it's like, okay, yeah, I had complications, but actually it's more complex than that. The complications drove me to question, what it was I was buying into, why my doctors abandoned me. And when I considered that in light of everything I was learning in school, through, reconnecting with my mom and my stepdad, through finding good role models to learn from and look up to, I realized I had the potential to choose something better for myself, that my transgender identity emerged from an amalgam of extremely complex yet unfortunately common circumstances that could be interpreted through other lenses. And through interpreting it in other lenses, I could go off of those medications that, were taking a toll on my body, not just the testosterone, but the SSRIs that I was on. And over the course of that 6 months, I had a breakthrough shortly after I moved out of my childhood home to live by myself in Austin for the first time. Because I was a class of 2020 high school graduate. So I started school online. I was online for school for like 7 years straight. And so going in person again, really, feeling embodied, reflecting on the experience of transition, and having, I guess, like a crack in the facade that light could get through, and to feel that light on my skin. That was, I think, what really drove me to choose better. Because when I first detransitioned, it wasn't like, oh, I'm so happy being female, my dysphoria is resolved, I love being a woman. It was like, no, I have little girls who look up to me, little boys who look to me to see what a woman is, and like I have to present a better image than what I got growing up. Like I want to be a good role model. I want to create a better version of womanhood than what I felt I had. And I think from there, it was just kind of easy. Like I stopped being selfish about it, frankly. Like I got over myself, and I quit everything cold turkey. And I would say that was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made.
That's awesome. So is there, is there like a, this is going to sound so stupid, but do you have to go back onto estrogen in order to, or is it just I stopped taking all of the hormones and your body just naturally kicks into gear and does its thing to bring you
Yeah.
back to your natural form?
My body fortunately did kick back into gear. I know some other people who are less fortunate. Toward the end of my transition, a OB-GYN like tried convincing me to get a hysterectomy. And so I am really grateful I didn't listen to him, because having my own uterus and ovaries, like, that definitely helped. But it took me years to get back to normal. It took me 3 months to even get a period again. I would say I'm now 4 years off of the hormones as of last month. And I definitely feel like, okay, aside from the mastectomy, perhaps, obviously, I look as I was intended to look. And I've been fortunate enough with like my voice. I don't have a super gravelly, like nasally voice. I don't feel like I got a lot of the hairline loss or anything that some of my friends who have detransitioned have. So yeah, it was like my body knew. It was like riding a bike. My body took care of it for me.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm really, really happy to hear that, because it's, it sounds like you took the journey that a lot of young people take, or took like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Minus all of the, cutting pieces of your body off and hormones and all
and
that.
the lifelong endocrine disorders, etc.
Yeah, like exactly, right? Like a lot of young people 20 years ago who were questioning their sexuality or their gender, they would get into their 20s and realize, oh, I'm just gay. You know what I mean? But now, because of this evil, this thing, this darkness, whatever it is, now we're mutilating children, cutting them up into pieces, jamming their brains full of psychiatric medications. And we're creating just a world of, we're creating a world of psychopaths, and it's not their fault.
Yeah. Well, and it's tough when you mentioned earlier that, some people will have very persistent, consistent, insistent gender dysphoria and grow up to transition with a little bit more of a solid head on their shoulders. What I think is really tough right now is I don't even know how possible that is in the modern day, because of the way that young people are being inundated with this messaging. If you are a 4-year-old, how do we know you're going to grow out of it? Because you just go on YouTube when you're 13 and all of a sudden you're given this rhetoric of being essentially transgender. Like, do you actually get the opportunity to thoroughly explore that so you can make that as an informed adult? Is that even possible now? Is something I just find myself asking. So
totally. I mean, yeah. Right. Like, is it even possible for that to happen? Like, yeah, absolutely. Now I have two final questions, and I'll let you get to your homework. When you're coming off of the hormones, is there ups and downs, like peaks and valleys? Are you going through all this, is there any, what were the withdrawal symptoms like, if there were any?
It was hard, I think, for me. It's hard for me to say for sure, because I was pretty dissociated from my body at the time. Like, I was still getting back in touch with myself after being on SSRIs for so long, and after just, being kind of dissociated in the way of identifying as transgender. But it definitely was like going through puberty again. Like, I joke that I've gone through puberty 3 times. The first time, second time on testosterone, the third time coming off of it. And it could have been a lot easier. It could have been a lot worse, but it did happen. Like the flow, the ebbs and flows did happen. Just, I don't know to what degree I can quantify it.
Yeah. And okay. And Soren, final question. What brought you back to God?
That's a great one. I feel like I just saw the sense in the world. Like, I saw the patterns and I could no longer look away from them. I think for the longest time, I was still very agnostic. Like, I was still like, I don't know. Like, I want to believe in God, but it doesn't add up. And then I think more recently, I sat on, I believe in God, but I don't know what framework I use to understand that belief until Charlie Kirk was assassinated in September. last year. And I think at that point, I just took a step back and I looked at the world and I was like, no, like there is evil out there. Seeing all the people celebrating that, like regardless of what, you know, any given person thinks of him, just celebrating violence, celebrating this polarization. And not just like, I think at that point, I realized, okay, it's not just that people are polarized and don't know it. People are polarized and they're proud of it. And I just, seeing the way my life had improved and moving closer to God, even if I didn't have that full belief, and seeing this definitive evil in front of me, like what I felt was definitive evil, I feel like at that point I could no longer shy away from it. And so I was like, you know what? Like it's not my job to understand it. Like that's God's job to understand his creation. So I can do my best to live a good life, to live as like scripture like instructs me to. But you know, I kind of accept I don't have it all figured out. I just I know that God is real, and that's about all I need to.
Well, as somebody who's 20 years older than you, I'll tell you, you never figure it out.
Yeah.
It's like a constant journey. And
yeah.
Just a thing that I've come to realize, like through my own spiritual journey, is just that God loves everybody and Jesus Christ didn't discriminate in his message.
Yeah.
Right. Even though there are Christians, and I put that in quotes because I don't consider them real Christians, out there that will discriminate, Jesus Christ at no point in time in anything that he said discriminated. So
yeah. It's one of those complexities you were saying about love earlier, that people don't really understand what love is. And I think what I've grown to understand love as is in that kind of spirit of 1 Corinthians. It's not just about like joy and, you know, euphoria. It's about like that kind of hard, enduring commitment. It's about, I've said before, you know, compassion as both kind yet firm. So I think that that's the way, you know, Jesus led his life, and how we can try and live ours. You know, you can say no and not be an a-hole about it.
Oh, totally. I mean, you know, I have a lot of friends who are coming back to God themselves, and we have these long conversations, and I always tell them the same thing. Like, people have this idea that like when you give your life back to God, that it's like you wake up one morning and the sun's shining and the birds are singing. And
I wish.
No, what happens is God pulls you down and drags you across the rocky bottom and makes you face all of your ugliness and all the mistakes that you've made. And it's a purification process, and it's very, very difficult to go through. Yeah. Right. But on that note, you know, you're somebody who has faced a lot of trials and tribulations, and Soren, I'm happy to see you on the other side.
Yeah,
really, truly. I mean that, you know, like as somebody who has gone through a lot, I'm very happy to see a young woman living her life, going to school, and just like finding some sense of normalcy after all of the chaos.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. So Soren, before we get out of here, can you tell people what you're up to, where they can find you, that sort of thing?
Yeah, you can find me on X at Soren Aldaco. I also have a website, sorenaldaco.com. I've been hosting a web show actually twice weekly on Tuesdays and Fridays. That's live. People can watch that. And I also do consulting. So if anybody has like any burning questions, I offer my time there. They can reach out at contact@sorenaldaco.com.
Guys, read Soren's op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. Read more at sorenaldaco.com. I've been absorbing all things Soren for the past couple of days, and trust me, you'll be a much wiser and better person for it. So
that's flattering. Thank you.
Soren, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.